All right. Welcome to a new episode of the Miami Tech Pod. Thank you all for joining us. We have a really special episode today. We have Dave Fano, CEO, co-founder of Teal, right? Dave, thank you for joining us on the Miami Tech Pod. Caesar is out on vacation. So we got Brian, Maria, and Dave. Caesar's chilling on a beach somewhere in Turks and Caicos, living it up. So we can't blame him. Caesar takes no days off. So Caesar, you enjoy your vacation, but we miss you for sure. We'll catch you on the next one. But Dave, thank you for joining, brother. I think to start, would love to get a quick background on you. You're a Miami guy, right? You're born in Miami, raised in Miami. So tell us a little about yourself, your background, and then we'll get into Teal, why you started that company, and a little bit more about that.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, guys. I'm super excited to be here. And when Brian invited me, it was an absolute yes. Yeah, I'm super excited to help contribute to grow the community in whatever way that I can. So born and raised in Miami, born in Little Havana. My dad came from Cuba in the 60s. So my mom was born and raised in Miami. So really Miami, through and through. Went to elementary school, middle school, high school, college, went to FIU. And through that process, kind of really figured out what I wanted to do. It was when my uncle gave me my first computer, because my dad was a contractor and he thought computers were stupid. But my uncle was a graphic designer and gave me one of his leftover Macs. He taught me Photoshop. I then learned how to make fake IDs with it, which I think I'm past the statute of limitations, so I'm comfortable to say that. But then really got me excited about technology and art. I was like the art kid. I worked at a comic book shop in South Miami, was like a manager there for 5 years. Nice. It was just like my favorite thing ever. I was determined to make a comic book. Went to my high school guidance counselor. I wanted to draw. I was the kid that did like the t-shirts and the murals and the yearbook covers. I said, I want to be one of those people that makes those cool car drawings with like the watercolors. And she said, that's a mechanical engineer. Now I know that that's not the case. It's an industrial designer. But I went in home and told my dad, and he's like, you can't do that. You're like an art kid. You don't know how to do math. And my dad was a builder. So then that led me to like architecture, which was a real job. And so I studied architecture at FIU, met someone incredible like Kevin Smith, who's been local in the 3D scene for a long time. And when I said, okay, well, you know what, I'm going to sort of fake this architecture degree so I can like go make movie sets, because that's like sci-fi and cool. And that's my favorite stuff. So I took a bunch of 3D classes. I learned VRML. I think like action scripting was just sort of kicking off at the time. I learned how to 3D model in AutoCAD, which is like archaic at this point. But my excitement was technology and the speed. So I like had a little web design firm with a friend and was just learning what I was in Dreamweaver and whatever I could to do technology. And then I said, how can I keep this going? This sort of ruse of architecture for a profession that I want to go to. And like the most digitally oriented architecture school was Columbia in New York. Joe Kosinski, who ended up directing Tron and Oblivion, if anyone's seen those, beautiful visually, so narratively, but he's an incredible person. He was teaching there at the time, and I was like, it was my dream to go to school there for the 3D class. I didn't really care about enduring 3 years of architecture school, or I could have just gone to like a visual arts school. But anyways, I got in miraculously. My dad laughed at me. He's like, you're not going to get in there. Like, they're going to accept some schmo from Miami. But somehow or another, I got in. I went there for 3 years. And I lived in New York, and I fell in love with New York. And I think New York's an incredible place. It's such a very cool, like, symbiotic relationship with Miami and kind of its differences and its pace. But so I was there, and was there for almost 20 years. Ended up starting a business there. Ended up selling that company to WeWork. Had some really cool experiences. But then that sort of put me back to where I am now, and just sort of appreciating the sort of the privilege I've had and the craziness of my career and the sort of lack of resources for the majority of people when it comes to those kinds of decisions. And that's led me to focus on what I'm doing now at Teal.
Amazing. That's an awesome story. And I want to talk about Teal, but before I get into Teal, I got to give you a shout out with Macromedia and Dreamweaver and that whole suite, right? In the 90s, like I was the same, just like you. I got my start being an entrepreneur. I was 13 years old, messing on websites in GeoCities and Angel Fire and Tripod and those free hosting sites back in the day. And yeah, Dreamweaver, and what was the other one? They like used like Microsoft Front Page for some stuff.
Oh yeah, Front Page was legit.
There's like cultural clashes between the Front Page like backers and the Dreamweaver, and then like the purists. Like I was doing all this stuff at the same time too, because like Dave is, for context, Dave's a year older than me, and I think I'm maybe a year or two older than you, Will, right? So we were all doing this type of stuff at the same time. I remember charging like $50 for a website for like my dad's friend who was a dentist back in like 1996. And I was like, oh man, there's so much freaking money, and it was like such a shitty website.
That was the gateway drug to entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I was the master of tables, like slicing up JPEGs and making tables. Like that was amazing. Yeah, if you gave someone like that with Webflow today, they'd laugh you out of the building. How many of those like AOL CDs did you guys accumulate? Like I grabbed it out of every magazine. I would like take them from Barnes and Nobles or Borders, where I'd go skateboard, and I would like accumulate my 4 hours of AOL free.
That was it, man. My 100 hours of America Online. That's what got me on. And the chat rooms. It was the chat rooms on AOL that really, I was a huge wrestling. We're getting off topic, but I think this is an awesome tangent, so I want to explore. But I was a huge wrestling fan, like WCW, NWO, like that was my jam.
Me too.
NWO Wolfpack and that whole like Kevin Nash, thing. So that was how I got into web design. Was I was in a AOL chat room one day, and somebody says, can somebody make me a fan site of the Ultimate Warrior? Because there was no like MySpace or anything like that. You had to create your own fan sites. So I was like, I don't really know how to code, but I think I could figure this out. So like GeoCities had this like really nice HTML editor and kind of like a little site builder, put it together. Jim's Ultimate Warrior fan site, scrolling marquee. Welcome to Jim's Ultimate Warrior fan site.
Comic Sans, of course.
Comic Sans, the MIDI background music, right? Sign in, view my guest book, download Netscape Navigator, animated.
Did you have a counter on the page?
Oh, had to have the counter, bro.
Yeah, or a flame GIF, or something like that.
Yeah, what about the under construction guy?
You know?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, bro. We can talk about that for days. So tell us about Teal. So
wait. Before you get into that, you subtle flex. You sold the company to WeWork. Go back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was an interesting kind of sequence of events on how it happened. Actually, it's got a little bit of roots in Miami. When I graduated from grad school, I went and worked at a really great architecture firm called Shop Architects. They were one of the more digitally oriented architecture firms, because what ended up happening is I actually did like the process of making buildings. I sort of, I had like Stockholm syndrome with the profession. And like once I had sort of been in the schooling for long enough, I was like, wait a second, these building things are actually kind of interesting. And I knew a lot about it because I worked for my dad down here in Miami all through high school and college. I was a construction estimator. So I knew the building industry. I was like sweeping job sites when I was a baby. And what happened while I was at Columbia is I actually got really excited about how bits became atoms, and like going from the computer, we could make these perfectly 3D modeled buildings and design anything that our imagination could come up with. But then when it became physical, it got dumbed down into these rolls of paper that got bigger and bigger over time for like legal reasons, really. And the process got worse, actually. So you would have this like highly detailed thing that would become this abstracted, silly thing that was like a diagram, and I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. And we had one of the 3D printers in an architecture school. I helped set up our CNC fabrication shop. We bought a water jet cutter from the OCC guys. And so I was like really excited about going from the computer to the physical, robot construction, all sorts of stuff. So then I worked at this architecture firm that was kind of leading the edge, leading the charge on some of these things. And the industry just moves too slow. But that firm had done such a good job of attracting like-minded people, which is a topic we can continue to talk about. But they had built a community just in kind of the stuff they were putting out there. So I went in, and one of the people that ran the firm, Chris Sharpless, was one of my teachers at Columbia. I was lucky to get a job there. I worked there for 2 years, and I met two really incredible friends, and who eventually became my business partners. But while we were there, we were lucky enough to work on a project for Google on their first ground up building. This was in 2007. And they had been growing rapidly in Mountain View, but everything was renovations. They hadn't done their first ground up building. And whenever a company gets a chance to do a ground up building, they kind of make a showpiece out of it. The founders get involved and becomes very complicated. So we were doing this like really cool, funky building. And in the process, I wanted to learn about the search industry. So I read John Battel's book, Search, which is like on the history of Google. And I was like, wait a second, the building industry needs this. We should have like, I used to use this thing in my dad's office called the Blue Book, not the Kelly Blue Book for cars, but it's like this yellow pages of subcontractors. And that's how I found subcontractors. And I was like, this can be digitized. And so at the time, there was like Yelp, Angie's List. I was like, this should exist for construction. So me and my buddy Fed, who worked at Shop, started to put together the idea for this and how to create this like directory where and everything in construction was word of mouth. I would ask someone, hey, who's that drywall person or who's that AC contractor? So we wanted to build a platform to manage that. Him and I started to piece it together. We started to work on the designs of it. This Facebook was like just sort of becoming big at the time. It's like, this is how we're going to become billionaires. We're going to make this web startup. This is exciting. I could make kids soccer websites in Dreamweaver. Like I got this. And we actually came down to Miami and started to raise money from friends and family. And in 2007, where like that just didn't happen here. The idea of like how to raise money. I was talking to like my dad, who was a contractor. He's like, nah, I'm not doing that. Housing industry is in the toilet. I don't have money to give you for this. Luckily, and my brother, my sister, their dad, we have different dads, invested. And, we raised $135,000. Like each of us put in $5,000 as like skin in the game, me. And then our third partner, Steve, who we met at Shop, that we kind of folded into the mix. And we ended up saying, look, construction's too small. Like this should be anything. And we expanded it because that's how it's going to be huge, huge mistake, sort of, cardinal sin on startups is we got too broad too quickly. But anyways, that was the reason we left Shop, was to create this site called Who By You. But we said, look, we only raised $135,000. We got to make a living. Let's also do what we know how to do, which is this tech consulting in the architecture space. So let's create two companies at the same time, one called Case and then one called Who By You. And we'll do this consulting thing on the side, make a few bucks. And, within a year, we'll shut down Case because Who By You is going to be awesome. Fast forward, we had no idea what we were doing. It was 2007. Building tech was hard. We had a remote team. Consumer tech was really hard. We didn't have any experience in the space. We ended up building like very cool technology, but didn't know how to get people to use it. And Case started to do fairly well because it's what we knew how to do. We had an existing network of people. We were being brought into firms to do like what we had done at Shop and help them implement technology. And so Case did well. And eventually we paid back our investors with Case profits. We actually poured in probably another $100,000 of our own money into Who By You to try to make it work. But eventually we said, look, we got to focus. This isn't the right thing. It's not going to work out. And we shut it down. We paid everyone back. And then things with Case started to go really well, given that we were focused. We got clear on our roles, who was doing what we liked doing, what we didn't like doing. And then shortly thereafter, and where this comes together is I used to go code at night at a WeWork. They would run, two of the earliest employees would run a thing called WeWork After Dark at 154 Grand, which is the original WeWork. And they started to build a community of like entrepreneurs and people that were building things. And I'd go there, I was like single, eating my Chipotle every single day, like twice a day. So I'd work during the day and I'd go there at night, and I'd code on the front end, or I would do the design because I didn't really know how to code the back end. And I met Kyle O'Keefe, who was Miguel McKelvey's brother and the first employee. And I started to pitch them Who By You. I was like, look, how are you going to connect members? They got to exchange services. You should use Who By You. You could buy it off us. And they're like, yeah, we're going to build our own thing. But then one day I was working on Case stuff at night, and Kyle saw it and he's like, hey, we're going to build a whole bunch of buildings. And they had like 2 buildings at the time. And he's like, look, we should do some of this. I'm like, yeah. Tell me when you're ready. Our clients were big architecture firms. And, WeWork maybe had like 5 employees at the time. And then over time, things started to progress. I met with Miguel, became friends with them. Ultimately, they didn't want Who By You, but they did say, hey, look, we're starting to have like 10 buildings, 12 buildings now. And one day we're going to have 1,000 buildings. I'm like, yeah, whatever. And, but can you guys help us? Like, can you start to streamline our process? How can we become efficient? We don't want to do it the same old way. So then Case started to work with WeWork. And this was in like 2012 when they still only had just a few buildings. and their growth spurred our growth. And so we got very involved. We sort of helped map out a lot of the strategy for their growth. I essentially became like an executive on retainer. They were my key client. They had said, hey, why don't you guys just join us a few times? And we're like, nah, you know. And then in 2015, like they were getting really big. We were around 65 people at the time. We were very integral to what they were doing. About half our staff was working on WeWork projects. I mean, I think WeWork was like 40, 50 buildings at the time, and with another like 50 or 60 in the pipeline that we were working on. And so we said, look, the way we can have the most impact on this industry, which is really what we wanted to do with Case, was change the building industry. It's such a tough industry to have an impact on. We said, we actually think our mission is accelerated and expanded by joining WeWork, because now we're on the client side. We have capital to be able to actually affect the industry, drive contracts, change process. And so in 2015, we sold Case to WeWork, which we never thought we would. We didn't go into it with that ambition. And that was a really interesting experience. We learned a lot along the way. And I direct reported to Adam Newman for 4 years, was one of the top 5 execs in the company. And in 2019, I left when we were having our second child. I was just sort of burnt out, and walked away from a ton of equity and different things to do there. But I was like, I got to sort of put myself, my family, and my well-being first.
That's an awesome story, and I'm always curious. You spent that many years kind of building that company and then selling it. Obviously, you had an earn out with WeWork, and then you took some time off, you left, and now you started a new company, Teal, right? Want to talk about Teal, and like, again, there's this transition, I think, with every founder that sells their company. They're like, I need to take a break. I'm done. I need to focus on my family, my mental health, all that good stuff. But then you're an entrepreneur. You get the calling, you get the itch, you got to take another crack at it, got to do another at bat. Please tell us about what that itch was, or why you wanted to take another at bat, why you wanted to create Teal. What was that like motivational moment or thought or mission behind the company that said, this is the next thing that I want to work on?
So, I always really connected with WeWork's mission. Work has always been like a currency in my life. Our family is just like, it's work. Immigrant family, it's like, it's what you work. You don't have time to do other stuff. You work. And you don't even get to like your work. You just work. Dinner table is how's work. Call my dad, how's work. And little by little, I've iterated to making sure that the work that I was doing was something I enjoyed doing. And I think this is really important. And the people that I meet have always met in life that were the sort of enjoying things, like enjoyed their work. It was not seen as this thing that like, it's sure some people live to work and some people work to live, but that they enjoyed it. How much matters a little bit less, and I connected with that part. WeWork's mission was make and enable everyone to make a life, not just a living, or the do what you love stuff. But the part that I took issue with was that it guided everyone, or sort of encouraged like this sort of hustle culture of entrepreneurship. And I think entrepreneurship's awesome, but I also don't think it's for everyone. And we've done a really good job of kind of glorifying the successes, but we have not done a good job of surfacing like the difficulties and sort of like the wake of that kind of like maniacal focus. But that doesn't mean that entrepreneurship and starting your own company is like the only path to autonomy and fulfilling work. The problem is like the employee base doesn't really have it. And that's kind of what I started to see, because at the end of my time at WeWork, I was launching this new business line called Powered by We, which was we would bring WeWork to your company. A lot of companies are like, look, we come into a WeWork, we love the energy. It feels like everyone's happy, everyone's smiling, everyone's having fun. But we would really like that in our headquarters, because we have 50 million square feet and we're just not going to like abandon it. So then I said, okay, that's amazing. I love that idea of empowering everyone in a large company to have that. But what I started to see is like, there's only so much HR could do. If the person's not happy with their decisions, and I'm sure all of you know people that are in a career that they're not stoked about it. Somehow or another, their family was in medicine, so they went to medicine, but they don't really like it, or who knows what. And so if the person's not like clear on it, they're not going to be happy no matter what the company does. They could maybe treat some symptoms for a minute, but and then the company's not really motivated to help them be happy. And from a pure fulfillment perspective, just because of business, not because I'm sure the HR person would love to, I'm sure their manager would love to, but at the end of the day, a business has to succeed. And so if you've got someone who is in marketing and now wants to go be a product manager, maybe a company can help a little bit, but at the end of the day, it just does not behoove them to make that happen. And I was like, this is broken. The system's broken. There's nothing on the side of the consumer. Even if you look at like the way you can't write off education in the way that a company can. Everything really optimized for the company to do these things. But I just was thinking, I was like, the consumer needs this at the end of the day. Like the consumer is the enterprise. And if they could have an infrastructure like the enterprise that could strip away some of the things that cause fear and angst and pensiveness in the career journey, then people could have that sense of security to go pursue something that's actually fulfilling and makes them happy. And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna, this seems like a big, difficult problem that I'm excited about. I felt like I've been able to do it and it's been awesome and I don't regret a second of it. And I want to bring that to more people. So that's what we're trying to do with Teal.
You've been working on Teal for how long now? So
I probably started thinking about it, in like mid 2019, but no real action. And then when I was officially done at WeWork in October, November of 19, I said, okay, now it's time to like get serious about this and figure out what it is. And so I started a lot of the kind of light customer development. Careers are super complicated. It's a boil the ocean problem because there's so many nuances to it and it's so different for every person. So I started to say like, where in the career can I start? What's the right moment to try to affect with this long-term ambition of it really being accessible and like a pure digital thing? Because there is things like career coaches, career counselors, there are, but they're kind of still expensive and you don't know how to find somebody. So I was looking for where to start and did that sort of in earnest in October of 19. And I basically started shadowing job seekers. I was like, I put it out there, there was big layoffs at WeWork at the time, just because of the way the sort of everything worked out with SoftBank and the funding and the IPO and all those things. So right there, I was like, all right, I'm going to start to help these people, because people were getting laid off in big numbers. And we were also in a moment where there was like record low unemployment. It's just like a lot of people had jobs. The economy was doing great, but then we had this sort of like weird WeWork situation. So I said, let me focus on job search because that's kind of a moment to make a change. So I started like concierging job searches myself. Like I would write people's resumes. I would apply to jobs for them. And I would just like follow the process to learn where the issues were and where the challenges were and like what was stopping people and what was blocking people. I put in some of my own money. I started to hire a few people. I rang up Eric Martin, who we worked together at WeWork. He led community at WeWork, and then he was an early employee at Reddit. And I knew he had, and we really liked working together. So I got him to help me with some things, and we started doing this stuff by hand and helping people. And then little by little, we started to figure out where there's technological interventions were. We tried a couple of different like business models. And so we said, okay, we think we have something here. And we raised money in the end of February of 2020. Like I think we closed our funding on like February. We got our last check on February 28th. And then like the week later, the world turned upside down. And we've been working on it since. And we've kind of gone through a bunch of different iterations. We've learned a lot around the psychology of careers, the stigmas and the taboos and the fears. And I think it's one of like the most complex emotional topics that people go through. And I don't think we realize it. I feel like it's this like silent killer when it comes to stress because we can't talk about our careers out loud because we're worried we're going to lose our job if we say something, or that we're going to be like shamed for wanting to be happy at work because only entitled people get to do that, or for like, or sort of like, people that are privileged people is the better word is what I meant. So anyways, we've just been learning. And now we're really hitting our stride. We've gotten, kind of our intent has caught up. Our technology has caught up with our intent. We just crossed 16,000 users this month. Last month, we made the platform 100% free, with the goal of making it accessible. We feel like we've landed on what will be a really incredible business model. Direct to consumer subscription was kind of not the answer for job searching. We think it is for the broader career, but we're not there yet. So yeah, we're kind of right now, things are going really great. We're helping a ton of people. This month alone, we just crossed 3,000 signups. So it's growing great. We're having fun. And we're sort of making progress on the change of behavior that didn't exist before of getting people to use technology to manage their career.
I think that's really cool, sort of this progression and sort of and the overall mission. Like, and you and I talked about this the other day, but I do I find it sort of slightly interesting that you're building a remote company now, right? Or is the plan to eventually build like in person and build the team in one location?
No, we're fully remote, and you know what? It's really important to me that we practice what we preach. One of the things I was really excited about, also terrified by, was creating this like test-driven development of culture. Like if we're out there putting like we're this company that is for like the consumer to have control of their career, the second we don't do that, we're kind of like put in the firing squad. And I like that. I want that level of accountability for us, because I just think like walking the talk is everything. And so what is one of those things that is sort of appealing about starting a company is this sense of autonomy. I'm the boss. If I need to go to the doctor, if I need to go to the grocery store, I don't have to ask for permission. And that I don't think being an employee should prevent that from being the case. And so the only way to do that is to be a fully remote company. Well, not the only way. I shouldn't say that. But as soon as you have an office, like there just are these embedded expectations sort of systemically that are hard to change. So by being fully remote for the time being, that doesn't mean that eventually we have some touchdown space or some hub that I think, people can connect to. And I don't want to conflate work from home with remote. I think a lot of people make that mistake. If someone says, hey, I want a co-working because I got to get out of my house, we absolutely pay for it. Right. But the most important thing for me is I think there's too much talk about like remote, and it's not focusing on what people really want, which is one, to be trusted and to have access to the information, which I think people conflate with transparency. Got lots of thoughts on that. But that sense of autonomy, which comes with the trust. Right. And so what I've tried to do is make it explicit. Like, someone asked the other day, it's like, can I go on vacation? And I said, look, please don't ask to go on vacation. It's an FYI here. Just tell me. I'm going on vacation these days, and these are the things I did to make sure that no balls get dropped. And so that's really the goal for us, is that everyone have that sense of autonomy and control of their time and that sense of ownership, but still can be part of a thing that comes without the risk of necessarily needing to be an entrepreneur. And if someone wants to go start a company, we help them. I will do everything I can. But yeah, anyways, the short answer to your question is we're fully remote.
No, the reason I was asking is because I was curious of whether or not like your background in building physical spaces and building workspaces has informed your sort of how you think about it in an abstract way, right? Like what are the things that people need to get jobs done? What are the things they need to like be successful in their careers? And like, it's easy for someone, what's the adage? Like when you're a carpenter with a hammer, everything's a nail, right?
Yeah.
Like to go sort of monopath down the road and say like, well, everybody needs an office because that's what I know how to build, right? Or that's what I built for years, Granted, in your case, you could say everyone needs a 3D metaverse space to work in because I knew how to build whatever AutoCAD or something like that, And so, but yeah, it's really exciting. I'd love for you to sort of elaborate a little bit more on like also what brought you back to Miami, right? Because like a lot of the people we talk to on this pod are people who are new to Miami, and then there's people who like have been here for a long time. But like it's interesting and it's unique for us to have someone like you that was a 305 native and then comes back after a semester at sea or whatever you want to call it. You're so like I mean. So tell us, like, what brought you back, and like, what are some of the things that have surprised you since being back?
Yeah, I love that question. I was one of those people that every time I would come for Noche Buena, my whole family would be like, "When are you coming back? What are you waiting for?" And without even needing to pause, it was like never. Like, there's nothing for me here other than you guys. I love you guys, but you're a 2-hour flight away. Because I love New York. I love New York. I still love New York. I still think it is, no offense to Miami, my favorite city on the planet. It just has like an energy about it that's incredible. But obviously the pandemic sort of made us rethink things. I've got an incredible wife and 2 awesome daughters, and it was like we left the city for a year. We moved out to the suburbs of Long Island for a year. Which was, had its positives and negatives. But what it did is it kind of showed us something that honestly wasn't on the table was imagining a life outside of New York City. New York City has this just kind of like amazing gravitational pull about it that when you're in it, you're just like, oh, I don't leave this place. Like it's just got like, it's going so fast. It's like jumping off a 30-mile-an-hour treadmill. You would just never imagine doing that. And it just keeps you pulled in. And so that moment of kind of like falling out of the orbit of New York was like, oh, wait a second. Okay, let's, this is interesting to have a yard, which we had as kids. My wife grew up in Indianapolis, and so she's a suburb kid and I'm a suburb kid. I'm like, oh, wait, this stuff's not so bad. This is actually pretty cool that our kids can scrape their knees on the grass. And, it's not that our daughter isn't exposed to like, people cussing at each other on the street at like age 3, because that's just normal New York City life. You just grow up really fast. And there was something about like the slowing down of the pace that was welcomed, and us being able to focus on each other and not just like so consumed by the city. So we kind of we were thinking like, look, should we just stay out here for a little while longer? And then, honestly, I think Francis calls it the tweet that was heard around the world. When the excitement around Miami started happening, that became compelling to me, because honestly, I just never thought that there was a way for me to grow a career in tech. I said this to Brian the other day. I was naive to, in the sense that I wasn't appreciating how much was already here, but I had my very superficial view of what it was. And I just didn't think there was a path for me and what I wanted to do, of raise money and keep growing tech companies and the talent. But when all that stuff started to happen, I said, okay, well, this is interesting. Like I can continue to do what I want to do. The company's fully remote. There's a lot of other sort of very practical logistical benefits. Hadn't seen my family in 2 years. Where my wife's family lives wasn't really an option for us to go. And we said, hey, why don't we give it a shot? My wife doesn't actually even like the cold that much. She's like, she likes the warmth year round. And so we just started to say, wait, objectively, regardless of my family being there or not, Miami's the right place for us. Let's at least give it a shot, right? There's no downside. And then with all the tech energy and everything that was happening, and me being from there, and I think that there's things I've got. New York was a really, really cool place in 2008 when the tech scene was just starting to grow. And I loved it. And I wanted to be part of that again. I was like, I think there's a chance to go help build the community, bring back whatever I can. Like Miami did a lot for me. I'd love to give back. And so we said, we started looking at houses, I don't know, like on January 3rd, didn't find any houses, found a townhouse that I loved. We signed a lease, basically did like a FaceTime walkthrough, signed a lease with a February 1st move-in date, moved our kids mid-year, which maybe not advisable, but we have no regrets. And we were down here by February 5th. We just said, all right, let's go. And we've been here since, and it's been awesome.
Amazing. That's a great story. And I love the fact that you just picked up and you did it. And now I'm curious, now you're back. What are your thoughts? You got boots on the ground. You're here in Miami. You're going to all the events and things like that. What are your thoughts of the scene overall in general? What are the things that are really catching your eye? The things that you're doubling down on? How are you spending your time throughout the city? And just what overall are you most excited about?
Well, honestly, what I'm bummed about is how little I can go to. Right. That's one thing that, one day I'd love to talk more about. It's like what it's like to, having started a company at like 28 and single, and one at 40 with 2 kids.
I feel you, brother, on that 100%. It's so different.
It's so different.
Yep.
And so what I would say is, like, in a good way, I have a ton of FOMO, right? Which means that there's a lot going on. If I didn't have it, then I wouldn't feel like I'm missing out on anything. And so I think for me and my demographic and where I am, I think that's a really good sign. I think that there's a lot of things that have pull, and I would love to be a part of, and I'd want to be going to. And I feel like there's energy going, which even just as someone who is like tangentially connected to the community makes me proud and excited to be at a place that is like inducing FOMO. Like I'm in a tech scene versus a place that isn't. It's like, oh, well, there's just like nothing going on. So that actually, even that alone makes me feel good that there's stuff going on that I could go to if I wanted to, and it's on me that I can't make it happen. And so that's, I think it's legit. I think that we've gotten past a lot of, like, this is just a fad. Everyone will leave in the summer. I think there's amazing companies raising capital. I think the VCs are here. I think we've got a world-class CMO, promoting the scene in Francis. And I think that it's really what what the community needed, because I think there was a lot of really incredible things going on that just kind of weren't being talked about. Right? I think it was kind of like a, I'd say, I'm definitely in the get distribution first, product second. And I think Miami was very much like, hey, we're just focusing on our product. We're not really focusing on distribution. But I think it's all there now, like distribution and product. And so it's really exciting. And I'm excited for me to get a little more time back as we get more of our roots here, because I think we're still not like fully grounded in the sense of having time. Like my wife and I think have been on like one date in 6 months. So the idea of me being like, hey, I'm going to bounce and go to this like cool startup thing is just kind of like not really part of the conversation at home. But I'm excited to get there and know that the community is really flourishing and there's so many things to choose from.
So with so many of the startups now that are growing their team, I'm curious your feedback on like what would be the number one piece of advice you'd give these founders that are looking to grow their teams?
You got to make the value prop like really clear. Right. I think we are like what I've been calling in the age of agency. And I think people more than ever are highly critical about where they go work. I think Gen Z, all of our parents would just take a paycheck. The idea of like liking your job and being aligned with the mission of the company and what they stand for and who they contribute money to, it's just like, whatever, I just get a paycheck. Like they can do whatever they want. And that's not the world we live in today. Right? There's more access to information than ever. There is scrutiny at the corporate level, at the executive level. And, I think that the advice would be like, walk the talk, go out there and build a company that the modern workforce is proud to say they're a part of. And then I think a lot of the other things will fall into place. Like people don't prioritize comp. They prioritize career growth, fulfillment. They end up talking about comp because it's the most measurable thing. So build a company that is really trying to do something important to somebody, right? It doesn't have to change the world, but it's like having an impact. And if people can see that impact and communicate it, I think that's the other thing is like be vocal about the impact you're having with your workforce, maybe not externally because that's not exciting to you, but I think that get the workforce to understand the impact of the work you're doing, because otherwise they're going to go somewhere else. Like the idea of like tenure and staying places, it just doesn't even really matter anymore. And some of these things like, oh, well, people got to stay for 2 years. People are going to switch jobs on 6 months if they have to. And there's such a need for talent that companies are really willing to look the other way on that. We're getting to a place like, look, if this person's incredible, well, it'll be great to have them for 6 months. And if they go somewhere else. And so like the world is moving at such a crazy pace that getting the alignment on the growth of an individual with the growth of a company is just increasingly harder. So I think there's just going to be an understanding that people will, and it's also just like access to information. I think the move to remote has been a force multiplier for the workforce, right? You had all this like natural friction, like pretending I was going to a doctor's appointment to go to an interview, like all that's gone because you just like interview by Zoom now in between meetings. So I just think like companies really have to step up from a culture, employee engagement perspective, and they talk. That's the other thing. So it's like, if you're not a great place to work, you're going to have a hard time just attracting really great talent.
It's interesting. You touched on something which was like, as a leader, you have to be really good about communicating the value proposition of why people should work for you and work on your team. That sort of transcends all layers of the business, right? Because you're not going to be able to raise the money from investors. You're not going to be able to sell to customers. You're not going to be able to retain employees if you don't have a clear, why are we doing this, right? And why are we the best people to do this, And like, so all these, that's, to me, it seems like such a core thing to get right. Because if you're not getting that right, you're not going to be able to build a good culture of the people who do opt to work with you. There's going to be a lot of confusion as to like, what the fuck are we doing here? Why are we like doing this when we could be either making more money, building a button at Google, or whatever, right? Or have a better work-life balance, or whatever the case is, So I think it's that to me is a solid lesson of like sort of designing and understanding your value proposition and how it translates both internally and externally to any would-be founder or existing founder who might have had a lot of issues with turnover or struggles growing, but yeah, there's a lot of interesting lessons there.
I agree. And I think it's what you go realizing is like as companies get bigger, these things get fragmented for some reason. Like marketing's got their version, investor relations has their version, product has their version, but it's all the same thing. And so it's a little more work to get those like combined. But at a startup, it's really on the founder. And so it's like, don't like continue to force yourself to be like, no, it's one message. It's the same message, the same pitch to a VC that it is to an employee, that it is to the customer. If those are different and I'm needing to modify them, that's actually a ton of extra work on me to have these like slight variations and remembering who I told who, but it's more work to have that like crisp singular one, but it's worth it. It's one of those like go slow to go fast things. And it might come through iteration, right? And you know, I put advice out there, but I'm always super reluctant because I'm like, well, am I a hypocrite? Because there's definitely been times in my life that I didn't do that. But that's okay. You know, I think like that's also one of the pressures of existing today is like, you know, you can't change your mind. But I think that's kind of one of the things that as a startup, you got to be really comfortable doing and understanding that it's very much a work in progress. It's an iteration. If you said something that you contradict today, 2 weeks ago, that's because you're learning, and embrace it and be open about it. You know, acknowledge like, yeah, I used to think this, but now I think this because I learned it from that. And I think with like clarity on what you're trying to pursue as a startup, it's really important that you just always are communicating that out to everybody.
100%. No, I completely agree with that. And I think, you know, something you said, it made me think about kind of my own hiring strategies at my company and something I've done in my previous company, Live Ninja, and now at this new company, On-Chain Studios. You have to understand that when somebody's applying for a role, it's not a one-way conversation. It's a two-way conversation, right? And what I've always tried to do is just kind of be aware of the fact that this person's not going to be here forever, right? They're going to be here for a few years and they're going to go on to do something else in their life. What can this company give them to unlock that next chapter in their life? What do they want out of this tenure? And I always felt like it was just helpful to be honest with myself about that, because I think sometimes as hiring managers, we get obsessed with like, are you down with the mission? Are you going to be here for 10 years? Are you fully on board with what we're building? And it's not like that. It's not all or nothing. Be self-aware that this person could just be working for you for a year or 2 years or however it may be. And what can you provide to them that they'll be better equipped to take that next chapter and unlock the next chapter of their life after that tenure at your job?
It's one of like I'd say like one of the biggest like falsities of life, right? Like we approach a job like a marriage. Everyone in the beginning is like treating it like a marriage with this sort of unspoken expectation that you're going to be here forever. But like empirically, that is untrue. Like job tenure is 3 years, like max, right? So it is like a 99% certainty that we will not be working together for life. But it's like not talked about that way.
But Dave, I think that's a holdover from our parents' generation, right? And their parents' generation, and that you didn't get divorced, so you're the only way you separated was death, you know, and you never quit the company or the job you had because that would also result in death of starvation, you know, like so all these these are lifetime decision things, you know, I think are holdovers, and it's as the boomer generation starts sort of phasing out of the workforce, you know, we'll start seeing less and less sort of anchoring on that as being the length of the engagement, right? You know, I mean, my parents have worked at the same place for 45 years, which is mind-boggling. And I told them the other day, I was like, you know, you would have made a lot more money in your career if you had switched around a few times. And they're like, yeah, but it was so safe, and you know, we had job security and we were comfortable, you know, and we had our life planned around sort of this sort of routine or foundation, you know. And I was like, we could have had a second house, you know.
You know, I go back and forth on this. There is something about, yeah, I think it may have been the case that we were all happiest when our real main concern was like a saber-toothed tiger wasn't going to eat us in our sleep, right? Like that was it. Everything else is awesome besides that. Now it's like, if I didn't get enough likes on my TikTok, I'm gonna have a really hard night, you know? And so there's something about like the spectrum there that I appreciate in your parents. Like they had and have a sense of what enough is. Like Brene Brown talks a lot about this idea of enough. And there is something generationally that like, damn, if like no one can ever get that sense of enough because there was just like that one more little bit you could have done or that one more little thing. So, and I'm definitely more in like what I would call like the modern generation of it. But every once in a while I stop and be like, wow, I really appreciate what it must feel like to just be like, hey, this is cool. And so I don't know, maybe there's some way to kind of land in the middle, you know. So with like I do think actually people want to stay at the same job. It's just unfortunately the company's like not the right soil for their roots. And that's the part that's just like we got to be able to have an honest conversation about that. If you're just like blocking my growth. But you know, to take a little bit more of like a utopian view on it, I think we're mostly inherently good. Like, you know, a place that really shows that to me is how uncomfortable people are interviewing while on the clock. There's nothing that says you can't do that. You can take a lunch break, but people feel like it's a lack of integrity. They're being disloyal. And so we have like this like inherent loyalty and like integrity and kindness. And some of these things that are like commercial and selfish in nature kind of go against some of those things. And I think I think to your point, Brian, is I think we're getting more comfortable with the understanding of that. But I think we're a little bit fighting our human nature because we got to put food on the table and we got to make money. Where before it's like I'd go out and like hunt something that came from nature, and it wasn't about like me putting in the clock and worried about some manager firing me and all these other like crazy complexities. And like I'd bring it back and share it with the community because we were part of a pack. Now it's like it's just me. Like I got to go get that job. And my path to growth is like through my manager. So like that person that I'm friends with, but the only way I get promoted is if they leave or something. So like there's all these like weird perverse incentives in this like capital construct that we live in today. Mm-hmm. I don't have any answers. These are just sort of like dumb observations, but it's really complicated.
No, and we could absolutely talk for another hours about sort of the dynamics of workplaces and stuff and sort of how they're substitutes now for different aspects of our lives that we used to solve elsewhere, you know, whether it was church, family, civic communities, you know, and things like that. And which brings up tons of other sort of flashpoint topics, you know, that we've seen expressed in the last year and a half in public discourse. But no, I mean, like we could talk about these things for hours and all that, but unfortunately we don't have the time for that. And so we'll have to save it for another episode, or just lunch and dinner. And then that way you can give us interesting stories about your time working at WeWork that are not safe to be aired on a podcast.
Well, I guess fortunately a lot of them are in these books that are starting to come out. So, yeah, check out the few that recently came out. There's some good nuggets in there. It's almost like you know, when everyone complains to me about the workplace, I'm like, look, go read these first and then talk to me. You know, then we can actually like compare stories because, you know, you getting like not included to a meeting isn't that big of a deal.
No doubt. No, we are butting up towards the end here. I wish we had more time because Dave, I want to talk to you about lots of comic book stuff and NFT stuff and collectibles because I mean, I already see the Transformers in the back of your.
Oh yeah, man, that Devastator is amazing.
Oh, bro. We got to make an NFT out of that thing. Yeah.
No, because then I can't play with it.
Listen, let me tell you about my new project, and I'll show you how you can.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. There we go. Segue for the next time I join.
Yeah.
Dave, before we go, how can folks find you and learn more about Teal? What's the best way to reach out and learn more about the company?
Yeah. So personally, I'm the most active on Twitter at David Fano, Fano. Pretty active on LinkedIn as well. And then Teal is Teal like the color, TEAL, HQ.com. We added HQ because I couldn't get teal.com, but if you Google Teal HQ, you'll find us. It's amazing how those things stick. But yeah, tealhq.com. And yeah, we actually putting on a resume workshop on Tuesday. Or I don't know when this airs, but you're trying to do everything we can to help people be in jobs they love. So whatever I can do to help people do that, ping me. I'm super available.
Awesome. We'll put all of Dave's info in the description box so you guys can reach out. Dave's doing some amazing things. And like you said, super accessible. So feel free to reach out to him on Twitter and check out the website. And yeah, with that, we'll wrap up the episode. Thank you all for listening. And don't forget, like, comment, and subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that, what did the cool kids say? Smash that like button. Helps the algorithm. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks all.
Thanks for having me.